the debate continues tonight over whether to expand Atlanta's streetcar. Right now, the streetcar travels around downtown Atlanta and Auburn Avenue.
But a recently greenlit proposal would have it travel along the Beltline towards Midtown.
It's not functional. People aren't riding it. And they want to go and spend a minimum of $250 million to go 2 miles.
We think that people will want more of it.
And Atlanta's mayor wants to keep MARTA rail service off the most popular stretch of the Beltline and move it somewhere else.
We are committed to building rail on the Beltline. However, not in the form that has been previously discussed.
So we have to think, is it going to be rail? Is it going to be autonomous vehicles like pods? Is it going to be bus rapid transit? People have this notion that we're talking about putting heavy rail around the Beltline. That's not the case. You're talking about a nice, slow-moving people mover like you might see at an amusement park, or how you see in France and Italy and other places and in Europe. So I'd hate to take a 2006 marker to make a 2056 type decision. You see what I'm saying? So that's just where we are. It's no different. Nobody's backing away from anything. The math needs to work though.
Please exit through the rear door.
Doors open.
As always, thanks to my patrons. Your donations make this content possible.
If they wanted to run that in front of my house, you think I wouldn't be out there picketing? Oh, hell yes, I would. Oh, hell yes, I would.
When I was growing up, I used to visit the city of Atlanta around twice a year. I haven't been to Atlanta since 2016, which was 8 years ago. Wow. Anyways, here's a map of the MARTA system since I last visited. And here's a map of what it looks like today. Yeah, Atlanta is like top 10 friends that peaked in high school. I mean, when you think about 1970s era metros in the US, you think about 3 metro systems: BART, the DC Metro, and MARTA. But how come MARTA has stagnated so much? I mean, yeah, they're getting some new rolling stock updates, but BART and the DC Metro have not only updated the rolling stock, but they've also been expanding their system too. Both of them opening their own rail expansions within the 2020s. The last MARTA expansion was almost 24 years ago. Let me put that in perspective for you and me. My entire life, this is all I've known and all I've ever seen. You can rename stations and color in the lines all you want, but this is still the same system. Now, when I heard about the Beltline project, I was extremely excited. I said, wow, finally Atlanta is going to be focusing on some rail projects. And let me put a lot of emphasis on rail projects. Atlanta has a couple BRT projects in the making, which let me just pull up a picture right here for you to see.
Oh my god, bro. Oh hell no, man.
Shared lanes? Oh man, I swear, MARTA just makes you wanna...
You tripping, bro. You tripping.
First of all, I'm not even gonna begin with this right here, but these projects should be light rail or streetcar projects, but you know, let's keep the downtown loop streetcar as useless as we possibly can, I guess. Anyways, before we get into the light rail plans for the corridor, let's go over the Beltline's history. That way we can get a better understanding for why it exists. Take a look at Atlanta. Notice something about its geography? Atlanta is completely landlocked. So why is this city so large? Why is this so important? The answer is the railroads. Atlanta was, and still is in some cases, a really important rail hub. In the years after the Civil War, and with Reconstruction, Atlanta only became more of a rail hub. But with all this rail traffic, lines directly into the city of Atlanta became congested. And this is where the Beltline comes into play. The Beltline began as a railroad bypass around the congested downtown railroads. It was pretty much the I-285, but for trains, if that makes sense. At the time, the area around the belt was pretty much rural, so the land was cheap and easy to develop. The Beltline was built by 4 separate railroad companies: Southern Railway, the Atlanta and West Point Railroad, the Louisville and Nashville Railroad, and the Seaboard Airline. Each segment was built by the railroad company for their own use, allowing trains to not only quickly bypass the city, but also access their maintenance facilities on the outskirts of the town without impacting the downtown traffic. Construction on the belt began in 1871. 6 years after the Civil War ended. The Beltline was a great economic case for rebuilding the city of Atlanta.
Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how I ended up in this situation.
The Beltline would end up being completed in 1910. The height of the Beltline's use was in the early 20th century. Directly after its completion, major industries such as General Electric and Ford located their factories directly beside it. By the mid-century, the US government was engaged in their massive project to build interstates all across the US. This means that local freight was being delivered less by rail and more by trucks. During this period, transfer facilities began to arise along the Beltline, transferring goods from trains to trucks and vice versa. By the 1960s, the Beltline was largely abandoned. Today, along the Beltline, there are quiet residential neighborhoods, bustling commercial centers, and stagnant industrial zones. While some of these areas are seeing positive growth and development, many are economically deprived and in need of revitalization. The Atlanta BeltLine Incorporated was created in order to solve just that. The Atlanta BeltLine is a 22-mile, somewhat opened but mostly planned loop of multi-use trails and light rail on the former railway corridor. The Atlanta BeltLine is designed to reconnect neighborhoods and communities historically divided and marginalized by infrastructure, improve transportation, add green space, promote development, showcase Atlanta's art and culture, and create and preserve affordable housing. The project is in varying stages of development, with several mainline and spur trails being completed, and others just being unpaved but hikeable. Currently, there are no light rail or streetcar tracks being built. There is one section that is almost shovel ready, with the others being in various stages of planning, or just not fully planned out at all. In the summer of 2012, there was a referendum on whether or not a 1-cent sales tax should be implemented to fund traffic and road improvements. If approved, the tax would have funded several streetcar routes along the portions of the Beltline Trail. The streetcar routes would have created connections between MARTA stations and the downtown loop streetcar. Unfortunately, the sales tax did not pass. However, that didn't mean it was the end for the streetcar. In 2016, Atlanta voters passed the more MARTA sales tax, providing a future $1.3 billion for the expansion of transit in the city. 3 years later, in 2019, MARTA Board of Directors officially implemented the program. The project includes the expansion of the existing Atlanta streetcar tracks along the Beltline Corridor, a project known as the Streetcar East Extension and the Streetcar West Extension. Also included in the funding is the Beltline Northeast Light Rail Transit Corridor, the Beltline Southwest Light Rail Transit Corridor, and the Beltline Southeast Light Rail Transit Corridor. It should be noted that since the passage of the more MARTA sales tax in 2016, construction of the light rail streetcar system has been overseen by MARTA in close partnership with Atlanta BeltLine Incorporated. Okay, now that that basic stuff is out the way, let's go straight into the details of the infrastructure we're working with. The northwest section is by far the least worked on the entire present-day Beltline project. Part of the reasoning for that is that this section is the most active out of all the sections on the Beltline corridor. Freight trains still use this section to this day. This section of the belt consists of 4 railroads: Southern Railway, the Atlanta, Birmingham and Coastline Railway, the Louisville and Nashville Railroad, and the Seaboard Airline. Dates for the construction of this section of the railroad isn't quite clear, with the earliest documented representation of this section of the belt being in 1888. In this 1888 map, you can see the northernmost sections of the Beltline being depicted. This section of the Beltline is pretty strange, especially when looking at this map. The Seaboard Airline, which is at the top, and the Southern Railroad, which is directly underneath it and labeled Beltline Railroad, are both considered part of the Beltline, despite the fact that the Seaboard Airline continues out east and doesn't actually connect and finish the loop for the belt. There was an injunction and still is an injunction between the Seaboard Airline and the Southern Railroad near Armour. So is the Seaboard Airline part of the belt? If you say so. You can be whatever you want to be, And the Atlanta BeltLine Incorporated took that to heart, because the Seaboard Airline and not the Beltline is the right-of-way that they're planning to build on. The reasoning behind them not using the actual Beltline as their corridor is because of, surprise surprise, a Class 1 railroad. A Class 1 railroad named Amtrak. Yeah, it's actually not the freight railroad's fault this time. The reasoning behind Amtrak getting in the way is because of their plans to make Atlanta a future intercity rail hub. Put simply, there's not enough space on the right-of-way for them to share, especially because the right-of-way will need to be expanded for future Amtrak services. Of the 4 quadrants, the Southwest was the last to develop its portion of the Beltline. The earliest evidence of construction of the Southwest Quadrant was in 1905. When the Atlanta, Knoxville, and Northern Railway began construction of a rail yard in the upper portion of the quadrant. The Atlanta, Knoxville, and Northern Railway had been acquired and controlled by the Louisville and Nashville Railroad. By 1908, the Atlanta, Knoxville, and Northern Railway started running on the upper portion of the quadrant. Also during this time, the Atlanta, Birmingham, and Atlantic Railroad had tracks connecting to the Beltline. The Atlanta, Birmingham, and Atlantic... I know, bro. Stay with me. The Atlanta, Birmingham, and Atlantic Railroad would later be reconstructed into the Atlanta, Birmingham, and Coast Railroad. By 1910, the Louisville and Nashville Belt Railroad was also operating in the Southwest Quadrant. By 1926, this railroad would be controlled by the Atlantic Coast Railroad, a company that would eventually merge into the Louisville and Nashville Belt Railroad, and then much later CXX. It should be noted that within that decade, CXX would end up owning the majority of the Beltline. However, decades later,
I don't want to play with you anymore.
No, Andy, no, Andy, no!
4 years later, in 2018, the city of Atlanta would purchase this section for $25.8 million in order to start construction on the Beltline. But it's been 6 years and there still aren't any concrete transit plans for this section of the corridor. What? Construction of the Southeast Quadrant started in 1898 by the Atlanta and West Point Railroad as a way to bypass the central business district of Atlanta and as a connection between the Hulsey Yard and Oakland City. Hulsey Yard was originally built by the Georgia Railroad and is located on the northern edge of the southeastern quadrant. Hulsey Yard is strategically placed in the junction between the Northwest Quadrant, the Southwest Quadrant, and Atlanta's central corridor from Howell Junction. Because of this, the rail yard was a main transfer point for rail traffic coming into Atlanta. The goal of Hulsey was to reduce the amount of traffic moving to and from the eastern approach through the city center. When the Georgia Railroad built Hulsey Yard, it was fitted out with a roundhouse and everything. But that was all demolished when the rail yard was repurposed for intermodal traffic. In the past few decades, Hulsey Yard functioned as a CSX intermodal terminal, which utilized both trains and trucks to transfer goods coming into the city and used to rank 7th in freight volume for CXX. Nowadays, CXX has somewhat abandoned the yard. The reasoning behind it being that CXX's Fairburn Yard, an absolutely massive intermodal yard in Fairburn, Georgia, was significantly upgraded, becoming CXX's go-to intermodal yard in Georgia. Because of this, in 2019, Hulsey Yard sat completely empty for a year. The city deemed this as a problem. You may have noticed, Hulsey Yard creates a nasty divide between the Inman Park and Cabbagetown communities. Because of this, community members began creating plans to reconnect the two communities by redeveloping Hulsey Yard, and city officials urged CSX to sell the land for new development. For a while, it looked like CSX was going to do exactly that, but in a dramatic twist, CSX decided to turn the land into a transflow yard.
Stupid, I'm not gonna let you get the chance.
Is it? A transflow yard is a rail yard designed for transferring bulk freight, such as grains. CSX has already dismantled their massive Tilford yard in the northwest quadrant of the Beltline corridor for this exact purpose. The thing about transflow yards is that they need way less space, often needing less than a third of space than a hump yard or intermodal terminal yard would require. Because of this, the community surrounding Hulsey Yard persisted. At this point in time, it seems like CSX is just trying to keep the yard looking active, by either storing the overflow of containers from the Port of Savannah or storing the one-off rail car. The suspected reasoning behind this is to keep the city and the surrounding communities off their back until the land value has skyrocketed so that they can make a larger profit when selling.
Hello,
I like money.
The northeast quadrant of the Beltline contains what is most likely the earliest section of the Beltline. The initial segment of the northeast quadrant dates to the 1870s. This section of the Beltline was ideal for railroad development because it was sparsely populated farmland, meaning there was a lot of space for new manufacturing and industry-related businesses to pop up. This type of development was heavily desired in the post-Civil War South. Mills, foundries, car companies, furniture, and lumber companies all developed quickly around the Beltline. And after that, the residential communities that you see here today started to develop around these industries and businesses. Anyways, fast forward to the 21st century, when this section of the line is abandoned, Wayne Mason, a local land developer, would make a pretty big brain move and purchase the entire northeast quadrant to later sell it to the city for $66 million. Now, the plans for the Atlanta streetcar are not concrete at all, but the plans for the Beltline corridor are still not that concrete. And the reason for the plans being not concrete is because the city of Atlanta keeps changing the plans every 6 months. The Beltline project, since its inception, has always been planned as a light rail project. The creation of the Atlanta streetcar was a step to make the Beltline project a reality. This would have trains traveling through downtown and then onto the Beltline. The first plan was the Streetcar East extension. This would extend the light rail all the way to Ponce de Leon, utilizing the northeast quadrant. So let's take a look at it. We connect to the downtown streetcar loop at Southeast Edgewood Avenue and Northeast Jackson Street. We continue in mixed traffic down Southeast Edgewood Avenue and have a stop at Northeast Boulevard. Having the streetcar run in mixed traffic like this isn't great, but it does speak volumes about how simple this project actually is. Continuing on, we turn off of Southeast Edgewood Avenue and turn off to Northeast Randolph Street. However, we only stay on Northeast Randolph Street for a block before turning onto Northeast Auburn Ave. On Northeast Auburn Ave, we have a stop right before Northeast Irwin Street. Again, we're still in mixed traffic, so it's not great. However, this is the last stop in mixed traffic before the Beltline. We reach our first stop on the Beltline north of North Highland Ave. The next stop is just north of Ralph McGrew Boulevard. I'm not really a fan of how far away these stops are from cross streets. I understand that we're trying to place these stops closer to locations on the Beltline, but I think it makes more sense to place them closer to cross streets so that people can transfer from buses to the rail service. Again, we're trying to make actually useful transportation here. The next stop is Ponce de Leon, or if you're American, Ponce de Leon. The train stops a lot closer to the market than it actually does the street, so again, transfers to bus services are going to be a lot more annoying. Now, this plan was studied by MARTA and damn near ready to go. But then this happened.
Yeah, so we are still looking at how to make sure that we can fully vet this process of getting transportation around the Beltline as well. So we have to think, is it going to be rail? Is it going to be autonomous vehicles like pods? Is it going to be bus rapid transit? People have this notion that we're talking about putting heavy rail around the Beltline. That's not the case. You're talking about a nice, slow-moving people mover like you might see at an amusement park, or how you see in France and Italy and other places and in Europe. So we're looking at how much will that cost and how beneficial will it be to the public, how fast you can get around, what does it feel like? And so these are things that are in engineering studies right now. Once we come out with that, we'll make sure the public knows, and we can make a clear decision on, do we want it to be on rails, do we want it to be rubber tires, do we want it to be small pods, or do we want to just leave this as a walk?
So Mayor Dickens decided to walk back the plans. And it's not like the city of Atlanta hasn't done this before. There have been plans for light rail that have turned into glorified bus lanes. But this was another step. Small pods, leaving it as a walking trail, that's not what the people voted for and what the people are spending their taxpayer money on. So obviously people got upset. So Mayor Dickens walked back his own statement. He clarified it.
We are committed to building rail on the Beltline. However, not in the form that has been previously discussed. We want to concentrate those resources again on fixing the existing streetcar extending it to the Beltline, but not necessarily on the Beltline.
In MARTA's board of directors meeting, Atlanta's mayor and members of his office presented an alternative plan, adding a light rail and streetcars to or by the south side of the Beltline and potentially to the west side.
South side communities are the most, they have the most without cars and the most transit dependent.
So light rail came back on the table, but this time we're not actually extending the light rail onto the Beltline, we're just extending it to the Beltline. And the main reason for this is because the northeast section of the Beltline is already pretty developed. The park, the landscaping, the artwork, the retail and residential along the corridor, it's already there. And building light rail along the corridor requires a lot of construction, which in turn creates a lot of disruption to the residents and visitors along the corridor. And to be clear, this is a light rail project, not a heavy rail project as the mayor said before. So while there is a lot of construction, there isn't as much disruption as there would be building a heavy rail project. But since politicians get confused about the two, let me just explain it real quick. This is heavy rail, also known as subway or metro. Heavy rail uses heavier and larger vehicles than light rail, hence the name. And the thing about heavy rail is that it doesn't street run like light rail. Therefore, it's faster and able to transport more people. In the US, heavy rail is often regulated by the Federal Transit Administration and not the Federal Railroad Administration. This is the reason why heavy rail and mainline conventional rail often can't mix. And to be clear, I don't think many people are expecting MARTA to build heavy rail around the Beltline. The trail sharing the right-of-way pretty much takes this option out the question. Okay, so now that we know what heavy rail is, this is light rail. Light rail systems use lighter and smaller vehicles. They transport less passengers, are often slower than heavy rail because they can street run, but are cheaper to build. Now this is where things can get confusing. This is a streetcar. I know in Europe you probably call them trams, and probably call the aforementioned light rail vehicles, especially some of the ones in the US, also trams. The difference between light rail systems and streetcar systems is the fact that light rail has its own dedicated right-of-way for majority of the routes. Boston is actually a great example of what happens when a streetcar system turns itself into a light rail system. The city of Boston over a century has upgraded so much of their streetcar system to have its own dedicated right-of-way, and axed so much of its streetcar system that didn't have a dedicated right-of-way that it actually became a light rail system. Now, I don't believe in completely dismantling your streetcar routes, but I do believe in upgrading them. And that's what I'm hoping the Atlanta BeltLine project does for MARTA's streetcar system. MARTA says that streetcar speeds on the Beltline will be around 20 miles per hour. The excuse for the slow speeds is because of the shared right-of-way. MARTA's YouTube channel is interesting as it's flooded with videos documenting other cities' BRT, but I suggest that MARTA take a look at other cities' LRT. Remember MBTA's Green Line in Boston? Well, their light rail extension to Medford Tufts shares its right-of-way with not just a trail, but also regional rail. Now let's for a second ignore the fact that MBTA knowingly had the wrong track gauge installed for the extension for about a year, which then led to speed restrictions that were later lifted after installing the correct track gauge. Anyways, after that fiasco, speeds were lifted back to 40 miles per hour on the line. 40 miles per hour, that's double your proposed speed, and is sharing the right-of-way with two other modes of transportation? How did they do this? Now, MBTA might not be the most competent at track installation, but they did discover that using ancient 21st century BC Sumerian technology, a technology called wall and fence, could be used to separate the different modes of transportation, leading to a safer environment and faster speeds for their light rail. Now let's say you don't like the wall or fence because it looks too industrial. Now let me introduce you to an even older technology. Can you imagine that? It's called art. With this, communities can decorate the fence however they like. And if art isn't your thing, then there's an even older technology called tree and bush. You can simply hide the fence. With that being said, let me reiterate this. This project should not be a nice, slow-moving people mover like you might see at an amusement park. And grade crossings would be a problem, but luckily railroads figured that out in the 16th century when they were first being built. Bells, signs, and automated crossing gates would be great for this scenario. And if you don't like that, there's always the more expensive option of bridge. Again, this clearly shows you that this project is not difficult. Not only are we running the streetcar in mixed traffic, but when we get to the Beltline, the space is already available for transit to use.
Oh my
And because I couldn't really understand what the city was trying to do with the Beltline, I decided to ask MARTA, and this is what they said. I appreciate your contact on this issue. Although the more MARTA Atlantic program includes the Streetcar East extension amongst the prioritized list of transit expansion projects, the project's development will ultimately flow from the decisions undertaken by the City of Atlanta. MARTA stands ready to work with the City of Atlanta on this and other Beltline transit projects.
It's concerning, to be honest, that MARTA is, at times unable to see our side of things.
Right now, the two sides are arguing over an audit. The city says MARTA owes $70 million towards Atlanta's MARTA projects. MARTA says that number is closer to $865,000, a near $70 million discrepancy that Dickens said he will not back away from.
I draw circles, I don't draw lines, but I will find $70 million if you owe it to me.
And with this, it confirmed my realization that there isn't really a hierarchy when it comes to building transit in Atlanta. Unlike most transit systems, MARTA doesn't have the support of the state, and not having state funding is one thing, but also not having any state authority really negatively impacts how much you can expand your transit system. And for MARTA, that's basically not expanding at all. For MARTA, they have to sit back and watch a fight break out within Atlanta. And the worst part about this is that this fight isn't between NIMBYs and YIMBYs, it's between YIMBYs and YIMBYs. Two allegedly pro-transit groups fighting for whether or not they should build the streetcar on the Beltline. On one side there's Beltline Rail Now, and on the other side there's Better Atlanta Transit. Better Atlanta Transit convinced the mayor to pause the project and review it right before it was gonna break ground this year. Their argument is that the Streetcar East extension would further economic inequality because the rail line would be built along the wealthiest section of the Beltline corridor. Instead, they believe that the streetcar money would be better spent on BRT to the Beltline, microtransit, and bike lanes. Their second argument was that this extension would most likely dry up the rest of the money to expand the system, meaning the streetcar would never actually run through lower income neighborhoods. And I think that this is a fair concern, given that this wouldn't be the first time that a MARTA rail project did this.
His name is Harvey Reid, and he plays the blues. Harvey Reid lives at Perry Homes. It is the largest of the 37 public housing projects in Atlanta. The blues and Perry Homes go well together.
In the 1970s, there was a MARTA plan to extend heavy rail service into a public housing area known as Perry Homes. Perry Homes doesn't exist anymore as it was demolished, but at the time it was majority black. This was purposely put on a referendum to get black voters to vote yes for more funding for MARTA for multiple new expansions. And despite the decades of promises from MARTA to build the expansion to Perry Homes, that expansion never came, as MARTA was initially built and marketed as a parking ride system to serve white suburbanites, specifically after white flight, and not as a useful tool for transit-dependent people. And that's why Bankhead is the Green Line's current terminus. However, I can't shake off this feeling that Better Atlanta Transit is virtue signaling, as their largest argument and what they spend the most time talking about on their website is that building rail along the Beltline, specifically in that northeast section, would negatively impact the northeast section economically, as construction of the streetcar on the Beltline would take away a lot of green space and add to pedestrian congestion along the corridor. So their argument feels a lot less about avoiding economic inequality and more about avoiding the temporary negative economic impact to the wealthy. However, Better Atlanta Transit and Beltline Rail Now both believe in building infill stations on MARTA's heavy rail lines where they intersect with the Beltline. But Beltline Rail Now still believes in having streetcar or light rail going around the Beltline for better interconnectivity, with their argument for continuing building the Streetcar East extension onto the Beltline being that MARTA already spent taxpayer money studying and prepping for this construction and service. The mayor's new plans essentially serve as his own compromise between the two organizations. And I understand that it's tempting to say, let's just build the southeast side of the Beltline corridor right now, as it's less developed and is currently under construction. But let me put it this way, streetcar or light rail around the Beltline was presented in the year 2000 as an idea. This gained a lot of steam and ended up getting voted for and passed in the year 2016 with more MARTA. If the mayor didn't put a wrench in the plans, rail along the Beltline corridor would have broke ground this year and would have allegedly been completed in 2028-2029. So nearly 30 years from concept to actuality, to build a slither, only 2 miles, of rail along the Beltline corridor. Stopping the current plan is adding additional years of having no rail along the corridor, and it will create a higher price tag in the future with inflation. Therefore, the money that Atlantans passed in 2016 will not be enough for 2056. On top of that, the south side of the corridor is already being gentrified, so what's going to end up happening is, by the time the project is about to break ground again, at this pace, let's say like 2030, the southern section of the Beltline is going to be redeveloped into this wealthy neighborhood or whatever, and the same wealthy people that were on the east side complaining are going to be complaining on the south side. And if disturbing wealthy people was such an issue, light rail along the corridor should have been built before the paths and the parks, and not as an afterthought. And I know some people might say, well, why would I expand the streetcar when it has such poor ridership?
Shut your
My brother in Christ, the streetcar circulates around 5 blocks. Who in their falcon flying, peach eating mind would ride that? So in my opinion, I believe that they should just build the Beltline project as it is right now, by actually breaking ground on the streetcar east extension. If they keep reevaluating the project and studying it to its death, it will never get built. So now you're spending taxpayer money and benefiting nobody. Damn, if only the city of Atlanta had as much coordination with the Beltline project as they do with Cop City. But I guess our priorities are centered more on arresting our citizens rather than giving them affordable access to economic opportunities like better education or employment, so they don't do things to get arrested in the first place. Anyways, if I earned your like and subscription, I love you, and if you made it this far in the video, thanks for watching.
Doors open.